So hi everyone, my name is Annie Lee. I'm an environmental planner of WSP, and I'll be one of your co-moderators today with Julia. Julia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Zoom tonight. I'm also an environmental planner with Parsons Corporation, and I'm really looking forward to the event tonight.
Yeah, we know how hard it is to join and stay on the computer for another hour after your long work day or school day, so we really appreciate it. Jana, do you want to go to the next slide? So just a brief overview of tonight. I wanted to go into a little background of why we decided to host this event and provide a few disclaimers before we start. Julia will be following this with an introduction to our speakers and a summary of the show, just in case you didn't get a chance to binge the series. Our speakers will then move into the selected scenes and the case studies, and we'll close with the Q&A from the audience. We will be reading the questions from the audience. So if you could please insert your questions into the chat box, we'll be reading those at the end. So the genesis of this event was spurred by the struggles and the social movements we saw today especially during quarantine. They were gaining momentum and they were dealing with really big issues that dealt with like homelessness and health risks for at-risk communities, as well as the movements related to BLM and a lot of the outcries for businesses that needed help, especially during the recession that quarantine kind of led into. We really wanted to make sure that we, as YPG, the Young Planners Group of San Diego, kind of dealt with this in a way that related back to our profession. We saw this as a really fun way to present this topic by using this show in a really creative and interactive way to engage our audience and relate it back to our profession. Next slide. So just some disclaimers before we start. We really want to emphasize that we are not speaking on behalf of the communities that we're using as case studies. We really don't want people to be like, oh, if we work in this community in the future on a project, that what I heard today is exactly what they want. This is just a way for us to focus on a creative and arts-based approach that could be a planning tool that you use. We also wanted to make sure that we emphasize that the show isn't showing the realistic struggles of the community today, but we're using it as a launching pad into a lot of these issues that we saw. And Julia will be now introducing our speakers.
Alrighty, so our first speaker is Mr. James Rojas. James is actually from Boyle Heights, where the show takes place, so we're really excited to have him and have that kind of firsthand perspective in this discussion. James has dedicated like the last 30 years to observing, researching, and documenting and teaching the ways in which Latinos are transforming the suburban environment. James has founded the Latino Urban Forum, advocating for awareness and solutions for planning and design issues, specifically faced by low-income Latinos. James founded Place It, which is an interactive urban planning organization that focuses on implementing model making, storytelling, and play to engage all aspects of the community in the urban planning process. James, we're so excited that you are here with us and looking forward to what you've got to say later on. All right, our second speaker is Ms. Nadia Nunez. Nadia provides a unique perspective to the discussion through her bicultural San Diego Tijuana roots. As a licensed architect, Nadia has studied and worked on both sides of the border in Mexico and the US. Her passion for art as a tool for healing and empowerment and drawing on her experience with the built environment is what led her to ARTS, or A Reason to Survive, which is a national city-based youth development organization. And at ARTS, Nadia is the community arts manager. I think you can go to the next slide, actually. Thanks. Nadia is the community arts manager. And in this role, she works with youth by providing opportunities for creativity, collaboration, and self-expression. Nadia, we can't wait to hear more from you, and thank you for being here. Alrighty. We will discuss the premise of the show. Also, apologies if you can hear my cat meowing in the background. So for those of you who may need a little refresher on the show, Gentefied centers around the lives of the Morales family, who are immigrants and descendants of immigrants from Mexico living in Boyle Heights. Their beloved Mama Fina's taco shop is in danger of closing. We see that in the episode, and throughout the show, we see the ways in which the family members and also connected to the family try to help save the taco shop, and sometimes not save the taco shop in their own different ways. So that's a basic overview. We'll get more into certain scenes later on, but there were quite a few characters to keep track of, so Annie, over a quick show family tree next.
So James had this awesome idea to kind of show some of the characters in this family tree dynamic, and I kind of wanted to explain a little bit about this graphic that I put together. But on the top are the three kind of, I want to say, pivotal characters. You got the patriarch, which is Casimiro Morales, and then to the left is Chris, which is one of his grandsons, also known as the cook, that the family constantly makes fun of for being like a gringo. And then on the right is Eric. He is more of the traditional like grandson that stays in the community and tries to help traditions continue. To the bottom right is Jessica, which is the community advocate. And as you've seen in the series, she kind of advocates for the community in this really, I want to say like traditional way that you see with like protests and, angry yelling. And in the bottom is Anna. She's the artist, and she kind of rides this line between the tradition and wanting to do what's best for her, or I guess introduce more modernity into her community. And then over to the left, I wanted to describe two characters. I'm not so sure we'll be describing them in our scenes of our speakers, but I think they're really pivotal in showing gentrification in the community and in the show. So you have Tim, the gallery owner, and you have Rob, who's the landlord, who is kind of the one that sparks the entire problem of the show, which is trying to collect rent from a struggling family business. You can go ahead and move on. So what does Gentefied mean? Just like me, you were probably that planner that was drawn to the similarity to the word gentrification and didn't really realize it was a term coined by a Boyle Heights community bar owner. That person had coined the term after seeing development in his community by his community members and how well it worked for them. He essentially combined the Spanish word gente, which means people, with gentrification, which is a process that usually results in a more affluent community moving in and displacing residents and the culture of the space. Gentefication, in contrast, seeks to combat this phenomenon by encouraging people from the community, often young, upwardly mobile, college-educated Latinos, to develop their community in a way that doesn't wash away the legacies and the livelihoods of people who make up the community. Above is a definition that was pulled from the Chicago Tribune. There's tons of articles and great literature and research out there that kind of touches upon gentrification as well as gentrification, and there's different planning solutions. One nonprofit, the IAC in LA, is a really great resource if anyone wants to look more into that. And then down below is a quote from our very own speaker, James. He talks about how gentrification is about how people's memories, needs, and aspirations shape the built environment. People want a place of belonging, yet at the same time want to improve their lives. Every day, people are confronted with this situation. Hopefully, we'll hear more about that from him during his scenes. Next slide.
Okay, dude.
So speaking of the scenes, we are going to be focusing on 4 tonight. James will cover the first 2, which will surround the use of space and land use decisions, as well as loss of community space through design guidelines. And then Nadia will discuss 2 others, which focus on community involvement and equipping community members for success, like within the community. So with that, in the next 20 or so minutes, James, take it away with your two scenes.
Hi, I'm James Rojas, and I'm a city planner. I'm born and raised in Boyle Heights, been studying that environment for the past 30 years. So I kind of been looking at it from different angles. And I think so I did my thesis at MIT, looking at the way Latinos use public space in the US. And a lot of it is looking about myself, kind of examining myself in the US and these suburbs, and how do I fit in? Growing up in Boyle Heights, in East LA, I was always on the street. I was always talking to my neighbors. I was always out there. So it's how do people have these neighborhoods that have these really strong social bonds, social cohesion, and how do these social bonds and all the social networking impact the built environment and create this really strong, cohesive, community. So the first scene I picked was this guy sitting, watching. I think Anna painted a mural across the street. It's just these two random guys on chairs on the sidewalk. And that's kind of what the community is all about. It's kind of like just people using space in different ways. You wouldn't do this in a affluent neighborhood, but here in Boyle Heights, people just use space to kind of to survive. They use space to keep up with the culture and community, economic development. They see space being used different ways by Latinos. And this guy is just sitting out there, hanging out there. And that's his world, that's his space, that's his sidewalk. Public space, he's just using it, taking it over, and that's what he's doing. So the next slide. So these are just images, the way Latinos are kind of reconfiguring the American city. So, street vending. This is the corner of Wilshire, Santa Monica, Vermont, and Hollywood, and you have street vendors there. There's I think 10,000 street vendors a day on the streets of LA. And they go around, selling food and stuff like that and different things. But it's the way these sidewalks have been kind of being reinvented by Latinos by the way they use the space. Then a lot of Latinos, they walk because a lot of Latinos don't have cars. So they walk and take public transportation and bikes. So how does that walking change the way they see the environment? Because, LA is a really car designed environment. So in this case here, it's a woman is walking by a fence of brooms. How does that brooms enhance their experience of place? So how do Latinos transform their environment to make it more pedestrian friendly? So you see a lot of murals and vendors and shrines that really kind of fill that void created by the automobile. So you have these really kind of vibrant communities, the way they're being used. And then the middle picture is the Pachuca Boogie at Machu Plaza. It's like a retro Chicano car show and boogie, right? So it's, again, how Latino do spaces, just ways are just kind of dancing in the street in a really creative ways to celebrate culture. Day of the Dead ceremonies and all the ceremonies that take place there are very popular ways space is being used and kind of to keep culture together. Then you have Central Americans down on the lower left playing chess with bottle caps from MacArthur Park. There's people hanging out. So, people just and then you have a picture on the other side of a picture of a quinceañera and taking place in the park in Hollenbeck Park in Boyle Heights. Again, just this, you see it all over East LA and in LA during the springtime when people have quinceañeras. They use these landscapes. You can see the way the spaces in East LA or other parts of LA and the US are being used differently by Latinos for their everyday activities. From selling, from socializing, from walking, culture, from playing, it's all takes place on the street. It's like an open book. And you can read it in different ways. So that's why I picked that scene with the guys sitting down on the sidewalk as the way to understand this kind of transformation of space by Latinos and how they build themselves into these spaces. As opposed to our land use for cars and kind of taking people out of streets and out of other spaces. The next slide. Yes, so the next thing I picked was kind of like the front yard, the porch, and looking at how these kind of like these quasi public private spaces are really important to the Latino community. Because this is where they socialize, they bond with their neighbors, they kind of hang out there. The first thing they're talking about, the pregnancy, and, in the front porch. And the bottom scene is where they're talking, asking this guy to see how Mexican he is, but they're hanging out in the alleyway. So again, so these kind of spaces, especially in front yards, become really important for Latino culture, because that's what they kind of celebrate and kind of highlight their culture in their yards. And this comes from next slide. So the front yard becomes like a plaza. So in these diagrams, you'll see the typical Mexican house or Latin American house with the courtyard in the middle. You have the American suburb with the front yard and backyard, and then you have the Latino house with the porch and the front yard fence. And all of a sudden, there's this kind of transitional space that separates that kind of Latinos combined in the U.S. to kind of create their own kind of vernacular architecture. And those two scenes kind of play that out. But what happens though is that with the fences around the front yard, you kind of create these plazas in the front yard, because in the American house, the suburban house, the front door is at the house, but in the Latino house, it's at the front gate. Next slide. So yeah, so the whole idea is that this whole idea comes from the Spanish. When the Spanish came to the New World, they had a book called Law of the Indies, and it was a book that was going to colonize the New World by settlements, creating a series of settlements from Chile all the way up to California. And the settlements were all designed like an urban planning book. That said you had to have a plaza, you had to be next to water, be next to indigenous people. So this is how they designed Latin America. So a lot of Latin Americans come to Los Angeles, they miss the plaza, because in Los Angeles, in the suburbs, we don't have plazas. We are shopping malls, but not plazas. So that becomes kind of what people want and what they long for. Next slide. So what you see, you'll see like these front yards, all over East LA, designed like plazas. Like this top picture, you see these two kind of houses. The old kind of American house, and you have Latino house with the front porch, kind of just smacked on top of that house. And you see the arches and architecture. Then the bottom image shows this kind of threshold between the public and private space that happens at the front gates. And then so what happens is that threshold between public and private becomes a really important part of social interaction. Again, so Latinos socialize, or their social bonds take place in these sidewalks over these front gates. So that kind of really encourages more social interaction and more connection to community. So they begin to bond and kind of talk, over these spaces, but how the behavior patterns are shaping the environment, whereas an architect shaping them, they're shaping the architecture. Next slide. Yeah, so for me as a planner, what I do is how do we get Latinos to talk about this kind of phenomena that's taking place? A lot of times, this is really hard for people to even recognize or understand, even for planners. So I do a lot of community awareness of cultural spaces by giving talks, just like this, on the built environment. So I give a lot of lectures. I just gave a Zoom call to 13 Latino youth. They grew up in East LA, but they never understood the environment they lived in. Why is it different than Beverly Hills or Santa Monica? But having them talk about the front yard fence or how important it is to them, then they put a value on it, and then they can really think about how do you start to articulate and plan for a Latino neighborhood based on Latino needs and values. So it's really important so that's one way of doing it. Then the other way of doing it is I use art making as a city planning tool, because art making really helps break down the barriers between technical language and verbal language, and people get to use their hands to be creative. It's a way to get people to think about, it breaks down all the different barriers. You can really deconstruct structural racism in the built environment through this process of art making. So basically what I do, I have a 1-hour workshop called Place It, where I have people build, it's a way to, we use storytelling, objects, and play as a way to get people to build, a way to people to think differently and deeply about their communities. So the first activity is they build their favorite child memory as a way to understand space. Why do I belong here? What do I value here? Why is space important to me? And by building it, they begin to realize that it's about their emotions, about their stories that they want to talk about. because when we use language really kind of hides our emotions or shields our emotions from coming out. So here you have a deeper arrangement, a deeper engagement. People use object for that, and then everybody builds their memory, talks about it. And what I tell people is that memory is your DNA for city planning. That's what you're going to look for consciously or subconsciously the rest of your life. You're going to want to recreate that memory and build it out. So as planners, we're here to hear that story, tell that story, and uplift that story into a transportation plan, a housing plan, any kind of plan. But that story is and that's why planning is important to you. To getting Latinos to understand that planning is all about them, not about building more housing or building more freeways, but it's about their life and their story. And then after that, everybody shares their story. You create bond, and you create empathy, because empathy is really important for people to have if they're going to plan. So it happened so people work together in teams and they create their ideal world. So by using objects, they can negotiate that world really easily. And what I tell people that in planning, there's no right or wrong answer. It's how all our ideas impact each other to create a solution. So this way people realize that they're stronger together and they need each other to plan. So it's all about collaboration. So it works out really well for Latinos, because Latinos get to use their hands and kind of be imaginative and kind of talk about the deeper, emotions. And most of my clients are women. I've been over 1,000 workshops across the U.S. Most of my clients are women and people of color that want to have a deeper dive into urban planning. So I also use walking tours as a way to understand space. I give a lot of tours to East LA to all kinds of different groups of people, even residents. They would never think about it. It's all very, very much subconscious. And they also do pop-ups, using art making as a way to get people thinking about space. This is at a supermarket in the Empire. So this is how I kind of engage Latinos in the planning process. So I think see that next slide. I think that's so these are design guidelines that we came up with using this kind of method. So this is a plan we did for South Colton, and we did these practices, and at the end of it, we designed a neighborhood for Latinos by Latinos. You see the front yard fence, you see the fountain, you see the porch, and you see this environment that we told them. I go, this is what you're doing. This is great. Let's codify it and put it in code. This has become the standard in how you want to preserve the community through guidelines and through zoning. Otherwise, if you don't articulate your values as a community, you're not going to be able to defend it and have it thrive. It's going to be gentrified by somebody else. But having it in code, it can really become a more positive and productive way of looking at how you engage people and really kind of making more solid communities. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. All right, and turn on my video. And as a reminder, if you have questions throughout, please just type them into the chat, like Ricky just reminded everybody. And we're really looking forward to having an engaging discussion at the end of this. So without further ado, Nadia, take it away.
Sorry, real quick. Gina, will you please flip back to the arts introduction slides? This should have been on top, but I did want Nadia to have an opportunity to introduce arts in her own words.
Thank you, Annie. So this is just a presentation about arts, a reason to survive. We're a national city, and this is what we do. We transform our community through the power of your creativity. Next slide. And we do this working with different organizations and having various collaborations of all the types that you can imagine. We have done murals, market makeovers, and we're always engaging youth on everything that we do. So we can go to the scene slide. So this is the mural that is like the whole point of this show. It's a mural that Anna makes on the side of a little neighborhood market, and it's really, really great for her. So Anna she gets this opportunity to actually portray her art on the walls, and they do a few things wrong doing this project that we're going to talk about, but it's a really big opportunity for Anna. She's really excited, and she works with Tim, who clearly loves the design, and they put it on this wall. And they never really ask anyone if they like it, right? It's just they both like it, they put it on the wall, and everyone hates it, except for Casimiro, the grandfather, who you can see that it comes in and out saying like, hey, I really like it, it's great, just like really showing support for her kid. And it's a big fight. The market owner, you can see, is this lady who really wants to like it. She's really trying hard to like be okay with it, but then everyone in the community just hates it. So she has to like fight with Tim and with Anna to get rid of it. And a really interesting thing happens. Like Tim, who is like this completely outsider to the community and the culture, he just says like, they don't know what is good for them, right? Like this is his whole idea. And at the end of the episode, you can see that the mural is completely destroyed by the community. So maybe we can go to the other slide, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the way that we like to do things working with our community and our youth. So first, we connect with the people. It can be the owners, the government, whoever is trying to come out with a design in the community. We plan what is the best way of engaging this community. Like there's many different ways of doing it, right? But what will make sense for this project and for this community specifically? We work with community artists, and we involve our youth and their families to be a part of the process. And then we bring everyone to collaborate and make this mural. And then at least at the end, we have an installation and a celebration when we try to make everyone be a part of it. We can go to the next slide, and I have a few examples of projects. So this is an apartment complex that we did in National City. It was a brand new complex when people were just like starting to come in. So we did a big design workshop when we asked them what would they like to see, like what were things that make them happy, like what colors would like sit better for this like space. And we had a few iterations of murals. We present them to the community, and then they chose one. And then we also do this whole thing when we provide ways of the community being a part of it. So we just don't go and show up and put something on the wall. We make the people do it with their own hands. So everybody gets a brush, everybody gets like these tiles. We work with the kids ahead of time to make like these tiles, so you can see each one of those individuals, tiles are made by the families there. So at the end, they have this mural that they design and they install, and that it's part of them. We can go to the other slide. And this is a bigger project and a different type of engagement. So for this one, it was the city of National City got a grant, and they had like this opportunity to make this really big mural, and they wanted it to be an educational mural. So we didn't ask the community what they wanted to see there, because we knew what we wanted to put there. But what we did is we asked all of the families to help us create the mosaics and the tiles. And then we went through the community, and each one of the elements that you see there, you can see like little spoons and like jars and pizza plates and coins from the Navy. Like we walk around and we collected all of this from different organizations. So this wall, it's like 300 feet long, but it has over 1,000 people work in it. So this is a really good way of having a whole community be a part of something. We have 1,000 people that can walk by it and say, I did this wall, this is what I did. So community engagement is scalable, but it's very, very important to any of your projects. So any way that you can incorporate that. So this was another really fun scene and really one fun project that Eric was doing. So he started this tacos for book project when he will give free tacos for each book that every kid read. And it was really interesting. You can see like through the whole time, people are like saying like, why are you doing this? And they were like, Eric was like, it's an investment. It's an investment for, like, he understood that working with your community and working with your youth, it's a big part of it. You can see during the show that like the family start coming over because the kids are there, and the kids are like, the word in the playground is that you get free tacos. So this is really important for what we do too. So we understand that the youth are the future of these communities. If we want them to be involved and we want them to be a part of it, we need to start working with them. We create really good opportunities for them to have access to other skills and learning other things. So you also get the youth and the family buy-in. So you will see like families come and see what their students have done or what their kids have done. If they have done little libraries, they go and they take care of the books that are in there, or if they have like done buybacks, they are aware of people not destroying them. So it makes a really great sense of belonging and safety and all eyes on the street. Can we go to the next slide? This is just some examples that we have done before. So we have worked with, again, the City of National City to create a series of these bike racks when we work with students from the local high school who are in the welding department or the engineering department. And they design these bike racks representing whatever they want. Sometimes they can be about the city or about where they're coming from, and then we fabricate them and we place them to the city. So we have over 100 bike racks already with different and unique designs. And this gives like students a lot of different skill sets from like, I mean, obviously like designing and welding, but also just like how to place these ones through the city and what does it mean to work with the city and with a department to install them. We can go to the other one. We also have these design challenges when we work with students to find opportunities through their city or in their school, and they find something that they want to work on. So these are some examples that they did at one of the local high schools when they did some planners, they did murals, and they did some benches. So they figured out that the whole place was like gray and there was like no green spaces. So we really wanted some planners. They wanted something that was colorful and happy. So they all designed this mural and installed it. And there were no sitting areas. So they designed these benches and then they placed them like through the trees to the school. So again, it's just to make them be a part of that. And these are going to be there forever. So they're going to be able to go back and just look at what they did. And I think that's it. So yeah, community engagement fosters better outcomes, public support, and satisfaction. So nobody goes and destroys any murals. And they create strong relationships between all the community members, from kids to their parents or their grandpas. So community engagement, it's good, do it.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And I know those were just 4 scenes. There's a lot else that the show covered, and I think I've seen some questions come in kind of about more general topics of the show. So that's really great. And we can move on to questions. I'll be asking the questions. We've got some for Nadia, some for James, and some just more general. So let's see, we'll start with a question for James. You mentioned that the plaza has become an integral part of the single-family home in Latino neighborhoods. What is the relationship between these fenced-in front yards as familial plazas and the public space? Does the creation of this personal plaza ever lead to impersonal relationships with the public right-of-way? Example from the sidewalk or roadway.
Yeah, I think the plaza, like, this whole transition of this, they say a lot of Latinos, they move into, they buy a house in the suburb in the U.S. and they have a memory of home. Because a lot of Latin American cities, they would hang out in the plaza with their friends. So all of a sudden they're in this suburban San Diego or LA, and there's no plazas there to hang out with people, right? So they kind of reinvent this plaza in their imaginary plaza in their front yard with the fountain and with the with the benches and the walking paths and the different architecture elements of a plaza in Latin America. And because it's an aspiration. This is what they're taking this need, this memory, and this need to be social, and this aspiration of how they're going to present themselves in the U.S. now, in this new home. So it becomes a really important part for socializing. So what happens is that, like when I was doing my research, most of my research was done at the front gate, between the sidewalk and the front yard. Because in East LA, where I grew up, you could talk there as long as you want. It's not a formal place. It's not as formal as going inside somebody's home. In fact, it's probably like, for COVID, it's probably the place to be now, is outside. So it's a good way to really kind of use this kind of indoor, outdoor, public-private realm that we can fuse together, and use it and really kind of celebrate the climate of our region, because you can do this all year round, basically. And it really helps to reinforce the social cohesion of these neighborhoods. So people just, I could go to my aunt's front yard and she'll tell me the gossip of everybody on the street that walks by. She just knows it, right? She knows everybody lives there, and she hangs out there. So it becomes a very strong social connector, and it's a really good way to build kind of social cohesion in communities. These kind of front yard plazas. That's why these neighborhoods, these Latino neighborhoods, people tend to live there a long time, and they really get attached to them. As you kind of see in the movie, in this TV series, there's such a strong attachment to place. It's probably not the place itself, but it's the social networks that people create that attaches them to places. So it's kind of how it kind of reinforces, the place by social bonding. That becomes really important to them.
Awesome, thank you. We'll move on to a more general question next. In the first episode of the show, the landlord almost doubles the rent on the Morales family for the taco shop, I'm assuming. Or maybe it was their house. Anyway, is it legal in California to do so with or without a short notice? This could be for any of the planners.
Probably a lawyer question. Contract.
I think it depends by city, right?
Yeah, I think businesses aren't protected like residential is, but residential is protected by codes. You can only do 3% a year in LA or rent control. But I think for businesses, it's an open market. It's in fact, what's happening right now in LA is that a lot of the swap meets are closing down, other mercados, because people are losing rent. They have a really low margin of selling stuff. So if they lose their profit, if they lose their business, then they just shut down. So I think rents for commercial properties is a lot more flexible as far as going up and down. But I think residential has a lot more guidelines to it. It depends on the codes that the cities have put in force.
Well, thank you. Another general question for James and Nadia. What do you think the most true life examples of gentrification are on the show?
Definitely the rent one is a big one. It's very real. It's happening. And I think also like the whole theme thing, like this person who doesn't know anything about the community, who comes and tries to make things better on their eyes without having any context. I would say that's very real too.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm kind of like that person in between, because I'm born and raised there, and don't live there, but I do a lot of work there because I think as planners, when it comes to like transportation, housing, and planning, you have to have some kind of knowledge how to understand these battles you're going to fight. Like when I worked in Boyle Heights, I built a jogging path around the cemetery. It's a mile and a half, evergreen cemetery jogging path, and it's a rubberized track because in Boyle Heights there's no parks, no recreations. People would jog around the cemetery, but the cemetery was the sidewalk was broken, and the parkway and the sidewalk had big differences. It was a hazard. So I was able to talk to my friends that worked in City Hall and worked at Metro, and was able to get $800,000 to get a rubberized track in there. So for me, having that planning expertise was a way to help that community out. If I didn't have the connections to City Hall or public works departments, know how to get $800,000, it would have been just a pipe dream. So I think that's where I think it's important to have, a mix of people in the community to understand, how do you operate in these really kind of bureaucratic planning structures that are really hard. I mean, they're really hard to navigate, even as planners. So if you're an immigrant from Latin America, you're just stuck in this kind of like, what do I do? How do I do this? And you just have no control. So I think it's really important to have people that do have the expertise, and like one of my good friends, Marie Cabildo, we went to school together, and she told me we were at MIT together, and her idea was to go back to Boyle Heights and build affordable housing. So she created the East LA Community Corporation. Now they built the most affordable housing in East LA and Boyle Heights now. But that was her dream, but that was because she was educated and be able to understand real estate, tax credit, and financing to build these kind of things, to make these things happen. So I think you need this kind of, and also I think what's interesting too is that, like you look at that guy sitting on the sidewalk, and you think, like Boyle Heights for many years was kind of living in this kind of like little bubble where nothing happened there. It just kind of existed, but yet, so it's kind of isolated and kind of preserved. Like when I was doing my research 30 years ago, it was full of gangs. People were like, well, I'd never buy a house in Boyle Heights. Now it's all changed, but I think it's a way to get Latinos to start thinking about, if you're going to be here, you have to learn the politics, the planning, and how to maneuver in this U.S. environment. Because it's not like it takes some kind of expertise. So I tell Latinos, you have to put a value to your landscape in order to preserve it and talk about it and enhance it. We don't talk about it, about the taco shop, about the front yard fence, about the mural. You can't preserve it in this country. You got to put a value to it. Therefore, and that's where planning comes in, and getting planners to really do good community engagement to understand what are those deeper levels of way people think about spaces that are maybe not easy to articulate on a map or dots on a map. You have to go deeper. So it's important to have that. So I think it's important to think about, how does this kind of trigger all the different kind of other ways of thinking about the community.
Awesome. And speaking of talking about it, it looks like Andres is familiar with the Evergreen Cemetery, not too far from the Gold Line station.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Alrighty, our next question is going to be for Nadia. What are some ways that planners can get community input that is not an online survey? What about ways to reach community members that traditionally aren't as involved in the planning process?
We like to do a lot of in-person meetings. Kind of like what James was talking about, like having people come, be present, and get like ideas from each other. And like being there, having a map, like talking about what you want and being able to draw it or show other ways. Like a lot of the people that we work with are not that great at really expressing like the best scenario for what they want, but they really know what they want, right? Like they want a kiosk, or they want a shade structure, or they want something that if you probably do a survey, you're never going to get these things. Like little kids are going to say, well, I want to swing at the bus stop, like that's a great idea. And you will never, ever get that if you just do an online survey. So right now we're having a little bit of trouble because of this pandemic. Like, how do we do community engagement that it's really engaging and that it's real? So we really don't like to do like surveys, or like people don't really read them or get the time to really think about what they're gonna say. Just really listen to the people and talk with people who can really like represent their community and know what they want. Not all communities are the same.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nadia, because I think it's interesting because I've done like both. Like I'll do a model with objects. You know, here's this model of a street. We designed the street, so people will put in like a jungle gym, a zoo, a beer garden in the street, and then we say, okay, here's a survey to fill out. Tell us what you want to see on the street, and then they'll say more street trees or crosswalks. So all the creativity that they release with the objects and being with the art and the objects, all of a sudden when you write something, it becomes really boring. Because people write or they speak just like an automatic pilot. And if you ask people what they want, they'll just, if you ask people what they want on the street, transportation, they'll probably say more parking and less traffic automatically. Not even thinking about what they're saying, right? But if you tell them, build this with objects, then they build it with their bodies and emotions, and you go really deep.
Yeah. Most people talk with their hands and they go things like this. So that's what you need to get, that you cannot get in a survey.
Yeah, that's important for planners to me it's important to go deep into the psyche of people to really understand what do they really want, you know, not just what they're going to say, because what happens is that people say things just on automatic pilot. They want more money, you want a bigger house. Okay, we all want that. It's balance, you know, that's what they say. Okay.
Noticing that communication is really important in this process. And again, this is going to be for Nadia, but feel free to chime in, James, after. Have you run into community opposition from residents who fear that these improvements or art projects could accelerate gentrification and lead to displacement? And then how do you mitigate these concerns?
We haven't really run into any like defiant, like any activism or anything. We've been mostly like really good at having community support. This theme has really occurred on working with the youth, like high school students, really worrying about what this means for their community, which is something like strange. You don't really think that a 17-year-old really cares about gentrification, but we have had a lot of conversations on what it means for the community. Like they know that they don't want to move. It's really hard, like for our community, not a lot of people are homeowners. So everybody kind of has like that feet on the door and they're very aware of it. National City is just starting. So it's not like completely gentrified or it's not really happening. So hopefully we figure out a way to do it. We're working with the government and they're trying to make everything good and slow and have a lot of like policies in place, but it is definitely a concern for young kids, even if it's like a really thing to imagine. We talk about it. We talk about all the good things that are going to come out of it, and all the good things that even that community development brings with that, right? So all the opportunities for the community, all the good things that are going to stay in the community, and yeah. It is a topic.
Yeah. I think also for art, it's interesting because, you know, like I see the Latino landscape as always a production of art all the time. It's always in production. You see the shrines, you see the fancy portraits, you see all these things always taking place. And art is kind of more of a product or a production of the Latino community, because I think because of the Spaniards, we have a strong tradition, or indigenous people, we have a strong tradition of really expressive landscapes. You know, you go to East LA, you see storefronts with, you know, painted with a pig's head or a cow's head, or for a beach store. It's visual language, so it's really part of our culture to be visual and really express ourselves. So it's a part of the landscape. So I think, but when you make art static, like just one piece, like one object, then it becomes not part of the landscape. Like, you know, for example, there's like they put a piece of art in Boyle Heights in front of the Ben Franklin Library, and it looks like a bunch of painted surfboards. It's nice colors, but I'm thinking like people in Boyle Heights, they produce art, they don't consume art. That would be great in Santa Monica when you're walking down the beach, you see that because it's like, wow, it's beautiful. But in Boyle Heights, people are just surviving, and part of survival is producing art. So it's kind of like it feels out of place in Boyle Heights. It just feels too static. They're just staying in the middle of the community. Why is it there? But in Santa Monica, it'd be lovely because you just walk by there and oh, it's beautiful art. Just kind of thinking about how people will use space and where their mind is at. Murals are just a way of just producing art all the time. Say so many murals get whitewashed and get redesigned, and it's always this production of art landscape.
So our next question is a question comment for both speakers. I feel that the activists were problematic in the show. What are some more productive forms of activism to support gentefication versus gentrification? Also, there was tension between personal enrichment versus how to uplift the whole community. Maybe what are some ways we could ease that tension?
Well, I think there's different ways to be active. Like I think Nadia's project, helping youth, is being active. Creating knowledge is a activity that you can do to really, people think that just you have to go protest something to really be be an activist. But you can educate people and create knowledge, and that's also activism. Because I think that's the way people when you talk to community members, they paint a mural, and they get excited about their community, they're happy, they become active. And you don't have to really, you don't have to have a protest sign, you can paint a mural. So I think there's different ways of thinking, where people fit in at, in this whole, activism scale. If you're going to educate people and produce knowledge, that's part of activism, or you're going to actually protest on the street, that's another form. But I just think for me, if I produce knowledge and make people more knowledgeable about their community and they become an activist, then that's my role as an activist. I don't really need to go out there and protest, because then, that's just, is that performance, or is that really authentic, really authentic, in activism?
Yeah, and I think also like what are you doing, and with that, like, is there even a point for that? Like, there are things that you cannot really change anymore. But if you're really active with your government, if you're really active with like policies, or if you find a way to like, I know it's really, really hard for like people in the community to know all these policies that are going to happen, or how to like even just like be active that way. But how do you really are having a voice when it matters, right?
Yeah, exactly. You need to be really strategic and understand this whole world and how it operates. Is it here or is it here? Is it me going to a community meeting, or is it me talking to the mayor or something?
Yeah, that sounds like you guys have a lot of creative ways to protest, or at least speak your mind. Let's see. Our next one is kind of related, also for both speakers. How can cities work with their different demographics to form their urban design guidelines that fit into the cultural history of the communities?
Just what design guidelines? Well, for me, I can say, when I start off all my meetings, I have people build their favorite child memory, because I never want people to forget who they are, where they come from, because that memory is you. And, so I think that's an important way to get people thinking about place in a really personal, very passionate, very real way that doesn't get erased. A lot of times, the city will hire some kind of outside consultant to come in and do a plan. And they'll bring their ideas in and say, well, okay, the city should look like this. Like I remember Boyle Heights, a couple of years ago, the CRA was always fixing the facades, making them nice. but then they paint them all beige, kind of all really kind of like boring. And the next year they'd be all painted over again. But it was kind of this artificial way of looking at space. But for me, it's like, no, I want to know what memories, what feelings, what emotions, what's your sensory details from Latin America or from wherever you come from that make place real to you, and how do we uplift that story and make it part of the design guidelines? Black space or Asian space, it's kind of really thinking about people's memories, because that's, people live in this kind of real world and live in this kind of historical world in themselves, So I think it's important to really capture people's memories in the planning process, and that way you're kind of more on cue with what people want.
And I think that also brings like how important it is to have someone that represents your culture in the higher levels. So someone that understands what it means to do anything, right? Like we talk about a plaza, like someone who just knows what that means and why is that important, who can really advocate for that, right? Like we want to have a policy that allows people to whatever. Or if you don't have those, like have a group of people who can really advise you and listen to people. The problem is when like someone just comes and like says like, this is what's best for this community, and it's not. So yeah, as long as you're open to understanding that you don't know the answers and you need to have some advice from the real community, the people, the children that are going to be there. So
that's a good point, Nadia. Because for example, like in Los Angeles, there is no zoning for a plaza. It doesn't exist in that. It doesn't exist in LA. It's not actual zone space. All the plazas in LA are kind of public spaces. They're kind of de facto plazas. It's either a transportation plaza or it's either a park. So it's always, it's not a zone for a plaza. This is a plaza. They win a zone for it, and it's gonna be like a plaza. No, it's always some de facto spot. So it doesn't even have its own kind of zoning designation. Because I know a lot of my friends work in open space projects, and they say, well, we're building this community garden or a park, but people want it to use like a plaza, but then we can't because the funding says it has to be a park. And that kind of activity is not allowed. So I think we have to really think about, how do we renegotiate our zoning codes to allow different people to be themselves and have different activities.
Yeah. And speaking of plazas, James, could you speak a little more to the transformation of the area around Mariachi Plaza, what it's been experiencing over the years, and then how the community has been reacting to it?
Okay, so Mariachi Plaza, that's kind of a interesting story, because I started looking at that plaza 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was just it was a community hub. It had a market, a laundromat, apartment building, and a donut shop in the middle of a triangle, traffic triangle. And the mariachis would hang out there in the parking lot to get gigs and do their thing. But then Metro, we in our wisdom, we thought, well, we should make this into a plaza. So what we did, we blocked off the street to make it to give it more pavement. But then the mariachis didn't have a place to park and get their clients, right? So they had trouble parking there. And so what's happened is kind of evolved from a community hub, because we took away the laundromat, the gas station, the market, and it became empty land. And we put the kiosco there, which is from Jalisco. It's beautiful. So now it's more of a symbolic center for Boyle Heights and less of a real community center, because all the places that were there before that made it a community center have all disappeared. The laundromat and the market and the gas station. So it's kind of evolving in a different direction now. Now they're kind of relooking at it and kind of building affordable housing there, which is good, but I don't know if it's it's become more of a landmark for Boyle Heights and less of an actual working space. Like people don't go there every day as they used to, because the leases aren't there anymore. So it's interesting as planners, how do we plan communities and how do we understand these kind of nuances about space, and people use them to get a really kind of authentic feel of what it's like, And you see the kiosco. In fact, in the show, they show the kiosco, they show First Street, and it's become a landmark for the community. But yet, it's not the way it was 30 years ago, as a real vibrant spot for people to do their everyday shopping. It's kind of evolving to something different.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. Another one for James. In terms of the design guidelines for Latinos by Latinos that you mentioned earlier, what are the biggest differences between these and your typical standard design guidelines?
Well, I think, what's interesting about Latinos, like, growing up in Boyle Heights, in East LA, you kind of grow up in this survival mode where everybody does their own thing to survive. So if your neighbor wants to plant corn in the front yard to survive, fine, let them do that, so it's never a question. But I think when you grow up in a middle class suburban neighborhood where all the front yards are the same, the houses are painted the same color, it's very conformist, you have this whole idea of perfection. You have a standard of perfection or values that middle class Americans always try to uphold. Like your neighbor, you have to have, as long as you have your front yard the right length, your house painted the right color, you're okay. So a lot of planners, they grew up in that world, so it's very easy to say what's right and what's wrong. It's very black and white, right? But in East LA, it's all gray. Making, grilling tamales, cooking, selling tamales in your front yard and growing corn here, it's all accepted. And I think we have to really think about planning and say, how do we have these kind of different kind of flexible zoning so it's not based on perfection. You have to do the same thing everywhere. It should be made you think about it in different ways and how we design guidelines that are more flexible to reflect the different uses. Right now they legalize street vending in Los Angeles. Now they kind of have to legalize the zoning for it. How does it look like physically? The activity is legal, but now what's the physical manifestation of the activity? And that's more detailed work. And I think planners are kind of lazy and they just don't want to go into these kind of details. They just think one size fits all. It's really. So I think the guidelines that we were looking at for Latinos was saying, okay, if you want to grow corn in your front yard, you want to grow, cactuses or sell, tamales, it's all good. It's not part of the plan. You can do whatever you want. Just keep that little fence up and just keep it, whatever. But that's just the way it looks.
I want to say another one is the additional dwelling units.
Oh, ADU.
ADUs, yes. We as Latin people, we always have like the uncle who's coming or the, whoever is coming to live with us. We just, in Mexico, you just build a little room and then you build a little room next to that and then you build like another thing on top of it. And it's fine. And you all can live in the same property here is not doable, but now you see like in National City, they just did that. Like now you can transform your garage. Like it was happening anyways, and it's happening anyway. So let's just have people do it, right?
Yeah, I think they ripped off the ADUs from Latino culture, because every house in East LA has an ADU behind it, had a garage conversion, and a lot of my friends grew up in garages. So it's just what we did, but people just didn't. People like in LA, people on the west side thought garages are for cars, not for people. People on the east side, it was for people. But yeah, so it had this kind of split. But now we have ADUs, and now it's okay. Yeah, but I think that came from the Latino community, ADUs.
That's really interesting. Thank you guys for your anecdotes. This next one is pretty fun. What would you both like to see in the second season of Gentefied that would be helpful or beneficial to the Latino community?
Definitely what happens to Casimiro, right?
I know that was such a sad ending. It was going so well.
I think we got to see a little bit of like what good can come out of it when this Casimiro's friend, this old lady who was like kind of like milking it, and she was like charging 3 times what she could. Maybe what other good things can come out of it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think I'd like to see a lot more landscape images of at least LA or the streets. I think one of my complaints is that most of the scenes took place inside the homes, and the Latino homes, they had them all very cluttered and kind of like dark. But Latinos have beautiful patios. They have beautiful front yards. They have beautiful, patios, outdoor spaces. Makes you feel more in these kind of like front yards where they have beautiful shrines, they have beautiful fountains, and not in the cramped homes, because the homes make it look very cramped and very kind of unfun. But really kind of look at the more fun spaces that Latinos create, and they really kind of highlight Latino creativity. How the built environment being changed by Latinos, and how can you highlight creativity of that landscape. How people use these spaces. You have all kinds of like beautiful front yard fences and porches. There's so much richness in the front yards that it's like a really, really beautiful to highlight the kind of stuff. That's what I would like to see, and figuring out how they remodel the taqueria or something, or where that goes to.
Alrighty, this next one is for Nadia. Right now, what signs of gentrification do you see happening in National City?
Well, you can see like the basic things, right? Like development happening, like multi-story housing, they're kind of started. Prices on those apartments who are brand new are definitely higher, and rent are slightly going up. You can see like small businesses making their storefronts a little bit better, putting paint, caring about like putting plants, things that they didn't really do before. But you can also see like these other not so obvious ones, like there's more people walking their dogs, which never really happened before. Or there is like more like police cars just kind of like coming and checking things out, what didn't happen before because people are not safe. So it's like those little details of gentrification. Like I said, it's not really that bad. Most of the people that are here are still here, but now you see more of this like different people. There's some like newer hipster-ish businesses also popping out. And more breweries, definitely. We used to have one, now there's like another one coming. So
Thanks. Alrighty, again for Anna. I'm sorry, I was reading the question. Again, for Nadia, how do you think Anna could have handled the situation with the mural better without perpetuating gentrification, if at all possible?
I think a mural by itself is not going to gentrify a community, right? Like a really cool piece of art that you put somewhere is not really going to change everything. I think it comes with everything. So you have this owner who is trying to change the whole community, and that's like mainly his point. But I mean, a way that they could have done it was to, as the owner, as the community, if they like the mural, I'm sure, have the kids be a part of it, have the guys who were like sitting across the street, they could have been a part of it, they could have been like handing him the brushes or like giving her like water or something. Like it's all about making the community a part of it. And I'm really pro murals because I'm doing them. Maybe I'm gentrifying myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just there's so many ways that could have gone different when they could have involved like the business owner, this lady, that she definitely had something to say of what she wanted to see on the wall, like the people walking by, and definitely these guys across the street. So who is this mural for? Who's going to see it? That's the people that you should involve.
Yeah. I think what's interesting too is that the mural is only a wall, but the deal was already done. That the guy bought the building already, right? So it's like, this is like the tip of the iceberg, right? We're going to pay a mural on this building, but yet the whole building's already been sold. So it's just kind of, so the issue should have happened when the building got bought. That's when it should have been addressed. But now it's too late. Now it's a year there. So that's why people need to be aware of, land use planning and zoning and who's buying things and who's selling things. And, that's where, when people start buying houses in Boyle Heights, the banks are giving them money to buy a house there. So it's the banks that are kind of funding this gentrification. When it's just a little storefront, a coffee shop or something like that, they're very marginal. They have a very marginal, worth, but so I think it's kind of the big money that has to be addressed. Yeah.
All right. Everything we've heard so far has been amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. We are coming up a little bit on time, so we just wanted to conclude with both speakers. What are your closing thoughts about what planners can do to be better advocates to their communities?
I think that they can really think of the population that are going to be working with, the people who are going to be living in these spaces, and really take a deep dive into the culture of what they're working on. Because we're talking about Latin culture, but maybe whatever you're working is completely different, and maybe they don't like plazas, maybe they like something else. Involve the community on decisions. They know what they want, maybe they don't know how to say it, so create opportunities for them to communicate what they want. So even if it's with their hands, or if they make like this. So find different ways, involve the youth, involve the community. The youth will come with their families and everyone will be happy. And yeah, communication and who are you making this for, right? I think that's the whole point about gentrification versus community development. Like, who are you making this for? For the community who's there, who's going to stay, or for someone else to come in?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think for me, it's planners need to really give up their power about, like the power they have. That they don't hold the magic key to the city. It's about, they're not the visionary. We have to give up our power and let people plan for themselves. A lot of times when I talk with people about my workshops, where people can build their ideal community, planners get scared. And we can't let people do that because what if they build the wrong thing or build something that we can't build? But I tell them, I go, this is just a creative activity, and you have to give people the access to create and to imagine. Because it's like being in a relationship with the person. If you kind of control them, they're going to hate you. You have to give them this little flexibility to just imagine, and not be afraid of it. Because if you do it the right way, we're going to all want the same thing. So people need to be able to, planners just need to kind of be more kind of loosened up and just give people more power to have more trust and confidence in people that they can do the right thing. And really, but again, they have to think about, what tools do we use? I know for me, using art making and objects, I can guarantee good outcomes. That's just the way I know it's going to happen that way. So planners really need to think about, how do you give up the power? How do you listen, learn, and how do you make, how do you co-create with the community? And how do you make the community part of the planners to kind of uphold the plan? A lot of times planners say, we're making a plan, and this plan is not going to sit in the shelf. They sit in shelves because planners that take some control of it, that people just have people don't really care about it. And then if the plan goes wrong, people blame the planner. There's so many meetings where people say, you planner didn't do the wrong, you planner did this, you planner promised me this, and it didn't happen. Well, because you took too much control of the process. But if you give people half the process, let them do what they want. And I tell people, after I do my workshops, these ideas, these stories, these solutions are your story and your solutions. Now it's up to you to implement them, not the city but yourself. So we work together for that, but yet you have to really encourage self-determination amongst people in the community. It's part of their job to kind of be the planners too. Just kind of, so the planner just needs to kind of, give up control.
All right. Jana, will you please show the last slide? Awesome. So I just want to thank everyone again for, sharing your time with us, especially the speakers. You guys have been wonderful on this topic. I just wanted to make sure, with some tips at the end, let's all support our local Mama Finas. A lot of local family-owned businesses are struggling right now, especially with the recession from COVID. So let's, put our money where our mouth is and really help these community members. Us planners, residents, nonprofits, agencies, let's go forth and plan with people in mind. We want to help the people advocate for themselves, as well as, do what we can with the power we have. And I know a lot of us, especially since this program is aimed towards the developing professionals, the Young Planners Group, YPG, and we're not technically in a position yet to advocate for a lot of change that we want to see, but we are the next generation. Let's do what we can now, and we'll be the next, people in power in order to introduce a lot of these tools that we're learning about today. And lastly, keep a lookout for more YPG events. Additionally, if you're interested in doing what we did today and being part of the committee, applications are out. Please let us know on the email that we had on the constant contact if you want a link to the application. We'd love to see more events like this and more of your ideas come out. So special thanks again to our speakers and for our YPG committee members behind the scene, Kelsey and Jana, for running the show. And stay healthy, San Diego, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Great, good job. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Bye.